Well, hello. Welcome to this webinar series co-hosted by the National Good Food Network and the National Farm to Institution Metrics Collaborative. I'm joined by Hannah Layton from Farm to Institution New England and Colleen Matts from the MSU Center for Regional Food Systems, who are helping to facilitate and presenting on behalf of the collaborative today. The National Good Food Network, coordinated by the Wallace Center at Winrock International, convenes good food professionals in communities of practice to share best practices, solve problems, and continually re-energize. One of these communities of practice is around farm to institution metrics. The organizations in the National Farm to Institution Metrics Collaborative work across the country to measure and track the impact of the institutional market from producer to buyer. The group started in 2014 and now has 30 members based in 20 states working at municipal, county, multi-county, state, regional, and national levels. The collaborative holds quarterly calls and occasional in-person meetings, offers opportunities for collaborative partnership, and provides a platform for sharing best practices, foundational metrics, terminology, tools, and resources. At the end of the webinar, we'll share some information on how to access the resources and the information provided by the collaborative. These monthly 30-minute webinars are designed to provide a national audience of farm institutional practitioners, supporters, and advocates with the tools they need to measure farm to institution efforts in a meaningful way. Okay, so let me introduce our panelists for today. Colleen Matts works throughout Michigan to cultivate local food purchasing programs at institutions including schools, colleges, universities, and hospitals by linking farm to institution partners, developing and sharing resources, and providing technical assistance and policy support. She is the Michigan Core Partner for the National Farm to School Network and co-lead of the Michigan Farm to Institution Network and its local purchasing campaign, Cultivate Michigan, which she will tell us all about now. Colleen.
Right, thank you. So the Michigan Farm to Institution Network was first launched in 2014 as a space for learning, sharing, and working together to help farm to institution programs grow. Our goal is to help Michigan institutions reach the Michigan Good Food Charter goal of 20% Michigan foods by the year 2020. So we needed a way to help institutions track their local food purchases and progress toward this goal, and a way for us to aggregate that information across institution types located across the state to understand our collective progress. We also wanted to provide institutions with more information and resources to make it easier to find, buy, and serve and promote local seasonal foods. So Cultivate Michigan was born to serve as the local food purchasing, tracking, and promotion campaign of the Michigan Farm to Institution Network, which was launched concurrently in 2014. Now that we're 5 years in and just 1 year away from our 2020 goal target, it's an important time for us to reflect upon this campaign as we begin to assess how it should live on beyond that 2020 date. Given the statewide goal we are collectively working toward, Cultivate Michigan membership is available to institutions with food service programs. We have asked institutions, typically the food service or nutrition director, to sign up for Cultivate Michigan as a way to pledge that they'll work towards that 20% by 2020 goal and track their purchases. We display our membership breakdown on our website in this chart and through the map to show our geographic reach. Cultivate Michigan has multiple components that were designed to provide institutional food service directors and professionals with different ways to engage in the campaign and really try to meet them where they are. Since 2014, we have promoted seasonal featured foods, so that's one new food each season, and these are Michigan agricultural products that institutions use. Some of them are highly available in Michigan and to our institutional markets, like asparagus and apples. And some of them have supply chains that are still in development or catching up to institutional demand. So you'll see our foods here from 2014 to 2018. And cucumbers is our current feature for 2019. We also featured beef in the winter this year. So we provide posters and window decals like these for blueberries to highlight the featured foods in cafeterias or other dining areas. We provide these promotional materials in hard copy exclusively to our Cultivate Michigan members as an incentive or a carrot to join. We also provide them free of charge to anyone to print directly from our website, but we find that institutions do appreciate having the hard copies mailed to them directly. We also compile sourcing information from Broadline and specialty distributors for these foods, as well as from food hubs as they have these foods available and supply the necessary information to us. Along with the sourcing information, which is intended to make it super simple for food service buyers to find and buy the Michigan foods they seek, we also provide recipes for these foods, and some were developed and tested by Michigan food service directors and chefs. In 2018, we updated and pulled together all of the sourcing information from our previous individual guides for each featured food into one giant Cultivate Michigan sourcing guide, which we lovingly call the Super Guide. We did the same in 2019 for all of the recipes we've provided. So I'll show you a look at a couple of pages of our sourcing guide for potatoes. So you'll see here some Broadline distributor information all the way down to the item codes and the farm source as they're able to provide it. And this crowd probably knows about Cherry Capital Foods, a local food distributor here in Michigan, which is always able to provide the farm source information. So now on to the tracking component of Cultivate Michigan. When institutions join, we ask them to complete a simple profile survey to provide some basic information about their institution and its food service program. Then each year, we ask all members to complete a baseline survey for the local foods that we will feature that year. In these surveys, we try to get a sense of baseline purchasing for the featured foods to have data to compare after our feature. And here's what one page of a previous baseline survey for cherries looked like. Then we ask members to complete a quarterly survey, but these surveys can also be completed on an annual basis if the member prefers it. We do our best generally to stay flexible and keep things simple since we know that tracking is hard. This type of survey, as you'll see, includes which of this year's featured foods they did purchase and how much they spent on those foods, what sources they purchased the featured foods from, and if they encountered any challenges in purchasing them, just for us to know and share that back with the supply chain, and their total spending on Michigan foods and total overall spending by major food category for that quarter. For those institutions that complete surveys, the survey data is then added to their own Cultivate Michigan dashboard online so that they can track their progress towards the goal of 20% Michigan food by 2020. But no information about an individual institution's spending has been or will be shared publicly by us. Instead, we have compiled the purchasing data we receive from our members that do report into an annual data brief, and we started doing that in the 2016 year. So you'll see some of the summary data here from our 2017 brief. In 2018, we announced our first Cultivate Michigan Awards at the biennial Michigan Good Food Summit to recognize our members that have been providing consistent tracking information and if they reached a milestone towards the 20% by 2020 goal. Our first 4 awardees reached either 5%, 10%, or 15% Michigan foods of their total food service budgets in just one quarter, in any one quarter. Our hope is that by recognizing these institutions with an award, will motivate and inspire more institutions to join and track their progress too. In addition, we also offer Cultivate Michigan branded events that we share with our members and with the broader public. These include featured food or food systems tours, roundtable discussions with buyers and sellers of featured foods to talk through their supply and demand and to help food vendors understand institutional demand for certain foods. And over the past year and a half, we've hosted 5 regional Cultivate Michigan marketplace events that are Meet the Buyer style events co-hosted by some statewide and regional partners, namely the Michigan Departments of Education and Agriculture and Rural Development and MSU Extension educators. These events are intended to help regional buyers of all institution sizes and types make connections with local food vendors, including local farmers, and of the right scale and fit. So just a note for future reference, I have it on my list to compile a cumulative impact report of these events and the evaluations that we received. So I hope that'll be coming later this year. When we launched Cultivate Michigan, we pooled funds with our co-founders at the Ecology Center to develop a tracking platform and a website with web designers and a logo and initial templates for our promotional materials with graphic designers. And these were developed with a combination of funding sources, including funds from the W.K. Kellogg Foundation, the Kresge Foundation, Americana Foundation, and some other funds. And we've had a series of other funds from the Kellogg Foundation that supported Michigan Farm to School and our charter work that have helped to fund this effort, as well as some of our materials and activities. And significant MSU extension time and staff time has been going to support this work as well. So you'll see here our current structure in 2019, which is simpler than it was and a little more streamlined than when we launched in 2014, which was when we had a co-founder and co-lead at the Ecology Center. To manage Cultivate Michigan tracking, one member of our MFIN management team, which is really the group that helps make Cultivate Michigan and MFIN go, she manages our data brief and quarterly survey design among some of our other research projects related to farmed institution. And that's Catherine Colasanti of the MSU Center for Regional Food Systems, who's also highly involved in the organizing and planning of the charter effort so far. Also, to manage Cultivate Michigan tracking, as well as memberships and communications with our members, we've always had a farm to institution data manager position in place. And this position has been based here at the Center for Regional Food Systems and also serves as part of that MFIN management team. While this has been a part-time hourly position at about 16 or 29 hours a week, we have found it to be essential to have a dedicated person tending to these ongoing operations to manage incoming data and help document and share our progress. This position has also been responsible for managing data on other farmed institution related projects, including our My Farm to School grant program, which ran from 2011 to 2018, and managing evaluation data for the 10 cents a meal pilot program for K-12 schools. As the coordinator of MFIN at this point, I put some of my time through coordination, supervision of the data manager, fundraising, communications, to all of these efforts as well, and it's hard to determine just quite how much. But lastly, some of our management team and advisory committee members also serve as Cultivate Michigan ambassadors, we call them. They're regional connecting points for new members and new member recruitment. So that gives you a little bit of a sense of how this all works and what it takes, including some of the people, funds, and resources we need to make this all happen. So that was a very quick summary of what we've done to date, but I wanted to get into some lessons learned as well and some opportunities. So it's not surely new information to this crowd that tracking local food purchases made by institutions is hard. And it was hard when we started in 2014, and it's still hard, despite the development of our new platform to do so, and despite lots of conversations with supply chain providers of local foods. So it's still hard to ask our institutions to do this work, to take this time, and that's why our member base in Cultivate Michigan is still relatively small, given all of the institutions in the state, and the number of institutions that are actually doing the tracking work, even if they are members of Cultivate Michigan, is also very small. For our last data brief in 2017, only 14 institutions have reported, and they had reported over $4 million in spending on Michigan products between 2014 and 2017. And the 4 who received our rewards were the only to track consistently and reach those milestones towards 20%, as I mentioned before. But tracking really, I have found, has just been part of our purpose, and it's just part of the farmed institution story and the collective work to move the food system forward. We have found that having this membership base of highly motivated institutions supplies other benefits too. Firstly, our Cultivate Michigan members can really readily supply important information to help us communicate with food suppliers and vendors, like how they tend to define local. You'll see that here. What they know about food safety and what they require for food safety assurances, and even how they would like their kale, their local kale, to arrive at their kitchens. Having and sharing more information about institutional demand and the local food supply chain can then in turn help spark some food systems development, including new products like blended local beef and local bean burgers, and promising practices like using an egg cracking machine to turn whole local eggs into liquid eggs in-house at a hospital, and local food processing facilities with an eye toward institutional markets like Michigan Farm to Freezer. Members also help us share the story of how farm to institution works. They can share promising practices and inspire others, but hopefully they get the recognition they deserve this way as well. These stories can help put faces to the numbers we collect and kind of round out that statewide impact and that picture that we document and share on an annual basis. Through this work, we have also learned that relationships between buyers and sellers take time to establish and maintain, probably not new to you either, but we can also help by providing that sourcing information for larger conventional sources through our sourcing guide, which has some efficiencies built into it. We provide regional spaces for those personal connections to happen, including for smaller scale farmers and vendors through our Cultivate Michigan marketplaces. We provide different ways for institutional members to learn about the food system and engage with partners, like through our tours and networking events. And we provide longer-term local technical assistance through partners around the state, including MSU Extension educators, primarily in community food systems, to add that more personal touch that can have a lasting impact. Finally, we have found that funding and network development, funding for tracking and network development can be hard to get, and partners can really help make things happen in favor of the network. So they make MFIN and Cultivate Michigan go really by providing that additional staff time, and they provide in-kind services that are invaluable. They extend our reach around the state. They help us innovate, including with projects like Cultivate Michigan marketplaces and Making Michigan Recipes Work, which was a culinary training focused on local foods for food service professionals developed by our team of MSU Extension educators with some specialty crop block grant funding. So going forward, we'll continue to ask our members what they need and how we can serve them best, and learn from their work out in the field to continue to refine our operations and purpose accordingly. But it's time for us to take what we've collectively learned through trial and error, through lessons learned and opportunities, and apply it to inform the continued big picture vision for a good food system in Michigan beyond 2020. So as I mentioned before, the value so far for this farm to institution work has been on local. That's been the focus of our network. And at this time, we're exploring the idea of best value rather than lowest price purchasing, so that our institutions can express more of their values beyond local, like good nutrition, fair wages for workers, sustainable production practices, and animal welfare through their spending, which we all know can have a huge impact. So with that, I will close and thank you. And you can see my email address there if anyone wants to get in touch for more information.
Thanks, Colleen. We have a couple of questions that have already come in, and I invite everybody to add your questions to the questions box as we go. Colleen, the first question is pretty straightforward. We have somebody wondering what survey system you use to collect data from your respondents, from your members.
We actually have that built into our website. So it's not a simple Qualtrics survey tool like we use otherwise for a lot of our surveys out of the Center for Regional Food Systems, but that was developed with web designers to have it all built in so that it can feed into the dashboards that the institutional members can see.
Gotcha. Okay, thanks. And then another question, when you first started collecting data from members, did you explore other models other than self-reported data? Did you think about collecting raw data and doing the analysis yourself in the beginning?
Well, that's an interesting question. Through our experience, we have found that obtaining purchasing data is not the easiest, including if institutions ask for it themselves. So it can take lots of different forms, and the definitions of local are different depending on the Broadline food service distributor, for instance. So we do have in place a system that we were hoping would have more legs than it does, of asking for a data waiver from our institutions to sign so that the distributor or food vendor could supply their purchasing information to us directly, and then we could manage it from there and input it into our system. That didn't really take off, I think partly because those definitions are so different, and what the data can include looks very different, but it's allowed us to have some conversations with those suppliers. I hope I'm going in the right direction with answering that question.
I think so, but, yeah.
Okay. Generally, we've been asking institutions to collect the data themselves, partly because there's data coming from different types of distributors and vendors all into their shops. But we've made our data manager available for managing that data if and as needed, but we haven't had too much of a run on that request either.
So this is a sort of a follow-up to that question. Do you have any recommendations for institutions who want to talk to their distributors about providing meaningful data?
Be very clear and straightforward. We actually developed a tool for us to talk to food distributors and vendors so that we were all asking for the same information, and so that we could provide that to our institutional members if they were having those conversations. And I think in that way, it's most effective for the customer to be asking for this information. So we're trying to arm them with the information that we seek, which hopefully, if they're a Cultivate Michigan member, is also the information that they seek. So if you can outline what you want and how you want it, then that's at least a starting point for the conversation. And it may not always be possible, or it may not be possible tomorrow, but we're finding that even having that initial conversation is leading to some longer term changes and adjustments, and at least awareness about this need and issue.
Mm-hmm. Are there any examples of, are you thinking about creative ways to verify any of the information or validate any of the information that's being submitted either from the institution or the distributor or the grower for that matter?
We have not gotten that far. I'd be interested to hear if others have.
Feel free to add follow-up questions here. So we have a question about the 20% goal. 2020 is right around the corner. Can you give us an idea of where you are in relationship to that goal?
So it's still really hard to say where we are in relation to that goal, because we still don't have a clear picture of even what institutional food purchasing looks like statewide, what the food service budgets are of all of our institutions. So we're getting closer to even defining what that can look like. And as for instance, we're going to be working a little bit more with some publicly funded universities in Michigan, of which there are 15 that are very large buyers, to even understand what their food budgets might look like and what they're interested in local food purchasing, and if we can help them with advancing any local food purchasing goals that they might have, or maybe bringing in some of those other food values that we're hoping to express in the future. But as an example, that's just a tiny segment of college and university food service, and that's the one we decided to try to tackle first because it is attached to state funding. They are attached to state funding, so we can put kind of make the universe a little bit smaller and look just at those colleges and universities as a way to find an in. So I think we have the best sense of K-12 schools, and that is coming because we have coordination at the state level and federal funding. But when it comes down to colleges and universities and tiny early care and education programs, it's really hard to even have a sense of what the full picture looks like, let alone our progress toward it. But I think my finding has been that it's kind of about that in setting a big goal for everyone to work towards and have that framework. But there's so much more about the network building and connections that are formed and the food systems development that's come just because of the conversations that came from the goal, that maybe the goal itself is part of the strategy, but it's not the only thing.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And then we have a question about leveraging your institutional champions to inspire others to increase participation. This is something we think about at FIN as well. Is that something that you are actively doing?
Yes. So through our farm to school and farm to institution stories that we share, and Cultivate Michigan does have a story banking effort where we're trying to share promising practices and faces of the network. We're trying to help get the word out about the great things that all of our members and partners are doing to really make this work go. So that's one way that we do that. We also share all of those pieces that live on our website through social media. And through our training activities, we try to have institutional food service directors or professionals, as well as farmers and other supply chain partners, have a teaching role if we can, so that it's not just people like me sharing this is how you should do it. It's people who are really in the field sharing this is how you should do it from my experience. And this is how you can do it, and you can do it. We also are looking towards having a network gathering later on this year, and we were talking about having our advisory committee, which is all farmed institution practitioners, be really the face of that gathering, so that we're kind of behind the scenes operating the logistics of the meeting, but they're really showing off what they do and modeling that.
That's great. Thank you. Well, we are just about out of time. If we did not get to your question, we can try to respond, or Colleen can try to send some information via email after this webinar. We want to thank you all for joining us for this National Farm to Institution Metrics Collaborative webinar series. As Jeff mentioned, the collaborative is made up of leading farm to institution organizations from across the country who come together to share best practices for measuring the impact of the institutional market across the supply chain. You can read more about the collaborative and access a sample of resources from members by following the link on the screen. And you can email me if you have any questions about the collaborative in general. My email is hannah@farmedinstitution.org. And we will be sharing information about upcoming webinars soon, so stay tuned for that. And thanks for joining us.